What's going on, everybody? This is Mindful Politics, and I wanted to do this because it's honestly kind of a little bit insane to me how simple this really is. And I'm not going to say that it's going to be absolutely simple to put in practice, but honestly, it's just insane to me how simple these little things I'm going to explain to you here could be if we just put them into practice in some way. It's absolutely ridiculous because it's like, why does nobody think of these things, right? We have politicians who literally don't know anything about what they're doing. In most cases, they're not actually like aware of what they're doing. They're not very good at their jobs, and they're not really very good at what they do because they don't have incentives to do a good job for various reasons. So I wanted to do this because it's not that hard to make a system work. You just have to simplify a lot of these like complex rules and laws which get in the way of like doing things properly in a lot of ways, honestly. So a good example of this is taxes, right? It's so difficult to actually do your own taxes because there are so many goddamn laws and shit that it's absolutely insane to me. Like, when all you really need is a flat tax. And if you believe in a progressive tax as well, for like the rich or whatever, you can add that as well. You know, you could have like a 5% flat tax for people on the poverty line, which is like what, like 24,000 or something. It might have changed by now because of all the damn inflation that's happening because of all the Biden inflation. But you have a 5% tax, right? And if you're, honestly, I would say too that if you are actually less than 10,000, if you make less than 10,000, maybe 1%, because that's going to keep you from you being even worse off than you are, right? So, yeah, the poverty line. And then 10% could be like the middle class. You know, like 25 or 30,000. We could just say the poverty line is 30,000 to make it simpler. 30,000 to 100 and something thousand, whatever. Or 200,000, whatever it is, right? Let's just say 100,000 to make it simpler. And then 15% or 20%, and these are all just arbitrary numbers that I'm making up here, on the rich, on the 100,000aires. 20% for the millionaires, 25% for 10 millionaires, 30% for 100 million, and 35% for billion. And incentives, instead of forcing all these different like policies, like, oh, you should have a union, you should have all these things, and we force it on people like that. What we do, like, you literally have to pay union dues even if you don't want to be in a union. It's absolutely a little bit authoritarian in my opinion. It's not necessary. All you need is some incentive for these companies to treat workers right. Like if you're getting 30%, or if you're giving 30% taxes, take some of those taxes away as incentives to do a good job, be a good employer to your workers, right?
8:36 a.m. One notification.
Whatever that's going to be. And it's not complicated. People, like this is what I'm talking about. This is simple, but correct, in my opinion. Like this is not something that we can. This is not something that we have to like be all that like complicated over. Like, oh, we have to, deal with climate change in these kinds of ways, and it's like there are actually problems in doing things in that way. Like people like to talk about solar and wind and all these things, and they have a lot of problems. And I'm reading this book actually about hunger and how and what's really how do you actually deal with world hunger. It's also talking about climate change, and like 30% of emissions of climate change have to do with the way that we deal with all these kinds of foods that we're making. And there was some very we could save 30%, I think it was, or something like that, by doing things a bit differently. Like it's not as complex as it needs to be. Like we have this idea sometimes, I think, where
8:37 a.m.
it's
Press help, show notifications button. Spotify 1 minute ago. New episode with
where
Boss and Card Fader.
we kind of forget that we don't need to have things so complicated, and it honestly makes things worse. And the simpler we make it, the more efficient we can make government, honestly. Because it's not efficient right now. It hasn't been efficient for a long time, if ever. Because we have basically let the government do everything instead of letting the people do everything, right? And it's not that complicated, right? You could have like a system where you if you want people to have health care, you could have a system where the government could incentivize private companies to give you good health care by not by subsidies. Subsidies don't really work. Like if you're giving somebody $12 million, to farm, they're not really necessarily going to do a good job because they're getting $12 million to farm, right? They already have money. Why work hard to make more money? And so in that way, subsidies don't really work, but incentives do. Honestly, if you have tax breaks, they work. They will work. And it's not hard, people. It's honestly a little bit ridiculous to me that we have politicians who just don't get this very often. Like, and we could have incentives for politicians who do a good job and who do a bad job. If you do a bad job, year over year, according to the people or whatever, you actually get your you get your basically your income gets slashed a little bit. And if you do a good job, your income can increase a little bit, right? It's not, we can deal with these problems. But to do this, we do need more transparency, which we don't have at all. It's actually a little bit ridiculous. But it is not complicated. And this is honestly why we do need states' rights, because if we just let the federal government do everything, it is going to cause problems. And it's causing problems right now. We're having a government that is very authoritarian, honestly, in my opinion. There's a lot of evidence to support this. There was this report that came out. I don't know if any of you saw this. That it literally came out talking about how they were actually, like the DHS and whatnot were actually working with companies like Twitter and Facebook to literally censor what they call misinformation. But what is misinformation, right? People say one thing is real, people say another thing is real. And we all know, if you're paying attention, that the Democrats don't understand politics. They don't understand everything. They think all these things, and it's like, no, that's not right at all. And so they probably think misinformation is something that it isn't. It's absolutely insane to me. This is why we need more transparency. But we're never going to get it as long as we have people who have no incentive to do good jobs, who have no incentive to create more transparency, which is what we got. It's ridiculous. But we need more states' rights, unfortunately. And if that means that some states are hardcore on something and some states aren't, that's something that we have to figure out together. It's not a bad thing to have states' rights, but because a lot of times I've noticed that the Democratic Party, at least, has become so authoritarian. They don't want any disagreements in politics at all. And it's absolutely insane to me, because with disagreements, healthy disagreements, we could actually make this country work again. But we're not getting that. We're not getting that from Democrats. And to a certain extent, we're not getting it from Trump either, because Trump is just like, 2020, bro. My 2020 election, bro. It's like, maybe some of those things are true, but come on, man. It's been 2 years. We need to stop thinking about the past and start thinking about the future and what that future means for all of us. The Democrats are doing the same thing. They're like, oh yeah, Trump and January 6th, and MAGA is bad. And it's like, this is, people are fucking like children. We need some adults in the room to say, shut the fuck up. Do your damn job without complaining about MAGA and all these things that, in my opinion, wouldn't have been so bad if you people were actually like doing things properly. And get to work. Do something different. And stop blaming everybody else for your mistakes. And Trump does the same thing. It's honestly ridiculous to me too that people support Trump, even though he does literally the same thing in a lot of ways. Even though, to be honest, he is a little bit better than Biden in a lot of ways. All I gotta say is, like, thank God for DeSantis in Florida, because it's like, this is we need somebody like DeSantis, somebody who isn't so brash and like out there with his words and shit as a president, so that we can slowly return back into normalcy and compromise. Because people think that the solution is to become more principled, and there is something to that sometimes. I think there are times where that is necessary. Like if you're dealing with somebody like Biden, who is literally trying to take your freedoms away, your freedom of speech online, by doing these things. There are times like that where you have to make a clear line. You say, no, we have to stop there, right? Because it's in the Constitution, the First Amendment. We have to find a way of reforming Section 230. Trump says repeal it, but that's not going to help. It's not going to make things better. It's actually going to do exactly the opposite, because the left wants the same thing for different reasons. So we need to reform it, change it, change the way that it is working. And so, but going back to my point, people think that the solution is more principle. Making arguments based on principle, but making politics based on principle. And to a certain extent, like I said, I do agree. But honestly, we have to come to a compromise. We need to stop. Number one, we need to stop spending so much goddamn money. It's absolutely ridiculous. And some of that happened under Trump. That $5 trillion thing that was happening. But at least we had an emergency then. Now Biden just keeps making more of these bills, and it's like $1 trillion a bill sometimes. It's like $3 trillion. It's like, dude, what are you fucking doing? People are insane. I don't get it. Like, do they think money just like grows on trees? Because it doesn't. And that's why we're getting inflation. More inflation. Now, there's other reasons too, but that's definitely a part of it. And we're never going to pay this off, honestly. If we stop everything, right? If we stop paying for things all over the country, to pay this debt, it would take forever. It would take like 10, 20, 30 years or something. And that's honestly insane to me. And yeah, to be fair, like, it was started by a Republican. Like, George Bush just kept racking up the damn debt with this stupid war in Iraq and Afghanistan. These stupid wars that really didn't do anything, because then, Afghanistan is now Taliban controlled again, which is something that we all could have predicted easily if we just did a little bit of history. And Iraq is, I don't even think we're in Iraq anymore, which is, well, we might still be a little bit, but that is ridiculous. We need this, this whole, like, we have to be the world police. There are some benefits, I think, and there are some necessities. But, the more that we do this, the more that we actually start to, and I think this has actually happened, and this is why we're starting to see, countries like OPEC and all these company-based countries are not siding with the United States, because the United States have become meddlers in the world, and it's a little bit ridiculous that people don't realize that in politics, and politicians especially. And we have these like war-mongering neocons who are just like, more war, that'd be good. It's like, no. You people are so dumb. It's absolutely insane to me how dumb these people are. Because, more war is exactly why we're in this situation that we're in the first place. I'm not even sure we need a DHS, and all these different things that exist. People love to throw around these words like, oh yeah, but what about terrorism, terrorists, and all these things. And those words are like, in a lot of ways, I think they're just meant to scare people. Like, I mean, you could say that anybody is a terrorist. like a person who does like a home invasion, a murder, rape and violence and this kind of thing could be a terrorist. You could also say that somebody who kills innocent civilians with drones, like we do, are terrorists. And so, what really is a terrorist? It's such a dumb word, in my opinion. It's not really It's not really explaining anything. And honestly, I think it just is used to get people's emotions riled up. Like, oh, terrorism and terrorists. These people are terrorists. We need to deal with them. Or now they're using the word fascist. It's like, oh, yeah, Donald Trump and his people are fascist. And it's like, you people don't know what fascism is. I'm sorry, you just don't. And to be fair, I don't either. Because we haven't lived through it. We don't, unless you know what Mussolini did, you don't know what fascism really is. Elected, being elected, as Donald Trump was, is not fascism. Being unelected, like Donald Trump was, is actually the opposite of fascism. Yeah, you could say that Trump is being really weird and dumb about this whole, like, we need to take back our elections, they were stolen. But that's not fascism. It was really interesting to me that, like, 20 years before, we had to have recount because Al Gore was it was like a narrow victory for Bush in Florida or something. I don't think Al Gore was acting like Trump, and that's the problem with Trump. But that's what I'm talking about. We do have things like this happen, and we can recognize that without being absolutely stupid and saying, "Oh, this is fraud and voter fraud," and it's not. It's human error and procedural problems and things like this. Voter fraud is actually kind of rare from what I was looking up. But it definitely can be increased with the way that mail-in ballots are set up in a lot of places. Like if you have low security in mail-in ballots, you don't really have a way to know if ballots are efficacious or the right kind of ballot or whatever. You can have a ballot that's basically fraud. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's fraud, actually. I would say human error or procedural problems, because it isn't fraud. In most cases, I would say that it isn't fraud. People are talking about ballot harvesting, but that seems to be legal in most states. So, if you're one of those people who say that, you have to find out if you have that problem in your state and deal with it. And we have people now leaving cities in droves like New York and all these places because their policies just aren't really cutting it. And people think that Republicans are going to fix everything too, to be honest with you. And it's like, I highly doubt it's going to work that way. I highly doubt it's going to be that simple. Like, even if the Republicans win the Senate, I don't think it's going to make any difference. Maybe it'll slow Biden down, but it won't stop what Biden is doing. In my opinion. Because the Republicans most of them are establishment. It's just the way that it is, unfortunately. But anyways, I kind of got way off topic, but it is very much related because we have these difficult things that people are dealing with. And really, it could be very simple. And incentivizing rather than subsidizing, I think is more useful, less problematic. If you're doing a good job, incentivize, not subsidize. That's the solution. If you don't incentivize people to do a good job, they're not going to do a good job. If you don't incentivize people to create more jobs in the United States, you're not going to get more jobs in the United States. We need to rethink policies, and we probably do have some incentivizing going on, but it probably isn't enough in my opinion. Because the less that we have people who can actually do a good job, the more we have shitty politicians and shitty laws and legislating that's happening. And that's what we have. Very little transparency. But it is what it is. Honestly, I don't think that any of these things that I'm telling you here are ever going to happen because people are just too stuck in their worldview bubbles. And that's why I believe in states' rights, because at least if you have a federal government that's being stupid and being an asshole, states' rights can kind of go and say, no, you're not working, this isn't working, we need to do something differently. And like I said, thank God for someone like a DeSantis who's actually pretty he's actually done a really good job at certain things. And he's not a bad-mouth idiot like Trump. This might be a bit controversial to say, but if you think that Trump is going to win the 2024 election, the Maine election, you're probably going to be in it for a rude awakening, because you'll always have the people who will say never Trump. And a lot of those people, because people don't vote based on policies. Most people don't vote based on policy, based on actual party positions like this, what I'm talking about here, which is honestly in a lot of ways pretty libertarian in some ways, but in some ways, not completely, but not big L libertarian, but just some less authoritarian policies at least. But most people vote based on vibe. Trump narrowly won a lot of areas in 2016. And sure, he got a lot more votes in 2020. But that, doesn't necessarily mean that he still won, because he didn't necessarily. You're looking at, if you're looking at popular votes and things like this, it's definitely a lot bigger. What was it, a 6 million difference? Some crazy number. Because of the vibe of Trump. Trump has a really bad taste. It leaves a really bad taste in people's mouths. I like the way somebody was saying it, I really like Trump's policies, but I wish he would just shut the fuck up. And I completely agree. It's absolutely insane to me that we have somebody who is just not willing to curb his bad mouth behavior. It's absolutely insane. And the more that you
9:01 a.m.
support that,
Button. 30:04. 30. Finish recording. Button.
you are.
Swipe to cancel. Looking for finish recording.
So the more that you finish that, the more that you finish that, sorry, the more that you support that, the more you're going to alienate people who may normally agree with what you're saying, in my opinion. Because Trump may have a lot of backing from, like, a lot of these kind of people who are, fed up with the system, just want it to be destroyed. And in this kind of way, like, drain the swamp, right? But a lot of other people are going to not care necessarily about this, is if the vibe is bad. And whether you agree with that fact or not, it is the case, and we have to come to terms with these kinds of truths, because if we don't, we're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Which is what we have been doing for like the last 20 years with terrorism. I mean, the only terrorist attack that I know of that actually really happened until ISIS was 9/11. I mean, there's terrorist attacks in like Muslim countries with other Muslims, but there aren't really any here. It's all abroad, for the most part. There's an interesting book that I want to read from a person called John Mueller called Overblown, and it's really interesting to me. Like he talks about how a lot of these terrorist threats that people see are overblown. There's another one that's really interesting called The Stupidity of War that I also want to read because it sounds hilarious. Like, the title is awesome. But that's what we need. We need more of this. And we're not going to get it as long as you have people who are not willing to do these kinds of things. And that's what we have. And it's kind of annoying, but whatever, it is what it is. So, hope you liked this video. If you don't, you can leave a comment letting me know why. I do like to hear those sometimes. As long as it makes sense and it has valid arguments, leave me a comment. If it doesn't, if it's just like, oh, you're dumb because you sound like a Republican, and that's not, like, I'm not actually a Republican. I actually voted Obama I didn't vote for Trump in 2016 or 2020 because of the vibe problem. And also because, honestly, I don't really think that Trump is this big savior people think he is. All those years that he was claiming he was going to drain the swamp, he just didn't. There's a lot of swamp monsters that he was literally employing. Because it's not like, this might be a separate video actually, and I'll try to make this simple for all of you, because he's not like this person that you will want to look to do something necessarily good. Like, if it happens, honestly, I think it's more of a matter of luck than anything else, because Trump is kind of in it for a less pure reason than people might realize. Like, it's a popularity thing to a certain extent. And it's also a bit of a ego thing as well. And so if something threatens his ego, we were seeing that with DeSantis. He was calling DeSantis sanctimonious and all this other shit. And that's why you're not really going to see him doing these things, because he will become the swamp. And his party has become, well, not his party, I won't say his party, but like the people he was that he had were like swamp monsters, like John Bolton and the Priebus or whatever. All these people are like swamp monsters, like the worst of the worst in some cases. Like Bolton, like really, you're gonna get Bolton in there? Yeah, that's real smart, because he doesn't know that. I don't think he realizes that. I mean, I guess he eventually fired Bolton, but I doubt that had anything to do with the fact that Bolton was the swamp, one of these swamp monsters. It had more to do with, like a random spot of a random moment, spot on the spot moment where he was just like, yeah, this guy is annoying, or he's doing something bad to me or my ego. Must fire him. And we saw that constantly. But if you're a die-hard Trump supporter, you believe in his words.
36:07. Finish recording. Button.
And it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm not saying like he's horrible, like the worst thing you'll ever see. But he definitely isn't what people think he is in a lot of ways, I think. But anyways, it is what it is.